Doctor?
Wait, Doctor, no, stop. It's you, isn't it? It's you.
Yes.
I thought so. Doctor, this is the Dalek who killed Clara. At least I think it is. I managed to get her out of the city okay, but when we tried to get back into the city to save you, a Dalek caught her and killed her, and it's this Dalek. I'm 99% sure it's this Dalek that killed her. What? You killed Clara? So, in order to avenge her, I know that's not really your style, but in order to get your own back or whatever, here, take this gun and kill the Dalek. It's not a Dalek gun, but it'll do the job. I managed to borrow this from a sexy Earth agent called Agent Nick. So, yeah, here, just kill the Dalek, Doctor. Kill it. Kill it.
Do not kill me! Do not kill me!
Is Clara Oswald dead?
No, I am here. I am Clara Oswald. I am your friend. I am your friend.
You're saying some really strange things for a Dalek. You're acting a bit oddly as well. Open your casing.
How?
Just think the word open and it'll do it.
Okay.
It's so good to be out of that Dalek casing. Clara! Stupid thing. Clara! Oh, I lost you. I thought you had been turned into a Dalek. Again. Well, that was a splinter version of you, but you know what I mean. Oh, would you look at that? It was Clara the entire time. I have no idea how she got inside that Dalek casing. It's a complete utter surprise. I do like surprises. Missy, run before I get that gun back. Because I'm going to need it for the final scene of the episode. Fine then. I'm going to jump this series' ship anyway. I'll see you mid-next series. Right, fine, whatever. See you next series. Well, I managed to avoid an embarrassing situation. Can you imagine if I had just believed what Missy said and not noticed that the Dalek casing was saying some very strange things because you were inside the casing? How dumb would I have had to have been? Next thing you would have said would have been mercy. Well, you would have said please. It would have said mercy if it was trying to translate. Yeah, that would have been really, really, really stupid. I mean, who'd think that? Indeed, who? I just had a really good idea. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Nick here and welcome to my review of Doctor Who, Series 9, Episodes 1 and 2, The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar. There's a lot to unpackage with this two-part opener, so let's begin. But first, fun fact, this is the second of three two-part series openers in the revised series, the first being The Impossible Astronaut and Dave the Moon in Series 6, and the third and most recent being Spyfall, Parts 1 and 2 in Series 12. Okay, The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar. The plot of this story is that Davros, creator of the Daleks, first seen in Genesis of the Daleks, which aired just over 40 years before this story aired. This is technically the 40th anniversary story of Davros, I guess, unofficially. and he's now dying. So he asks his servant colony staff to find the doctor because Davros remembers the doctor coming to his rescue and then leaving him as a boy during the Scar the War, the Thousand-Year War in Skaro between the Thals and the Khalids, as seen in Genesis of the Daleks and mentioned in the Daleks. The Doctor initially arrives to save a boy in a war zone and then finds out that the boy is Davros, or at least a young Davros, who would later go on to create the Daleks. And he's left the sonic screwdriver with Davros as a way to get out of these high hand mines, which are basically hands which suck people into the ground in the war. So Davros then remembers that it was the Doctor who came to initially rescue him, but then left him when the Doctor realised who it was. But spoiler alert, the Doctor then comes back to save Davros at the end by destroying the hand mines and then takes him home. So Davros remembers that, and he has colony staff seek the 12th Doctor, played by Peter Capaldi, as Davros realises that the person who saved him was, in fact, his long-time nemesis, the Doctor. Or at least a incarnation of the Doctor, anyway. So colony staff has been sent out to find the 12th Doctor shortly after he had gone to Skaro and initially tried to rescue, but later abandoned Davros. And so to bring him to the dying Davros, so to have one last conversation. But it turns out it was all a part of a plan that Davros was hoping to use the Doctor's regeneration energy to bring himself back, revive himself, regenerate himself, keep him alive, and also give the Daleks the power to regenerate. Hang on a second, that sounds a lot like the Master's plan in The Timeless Children with the Cybermen. Oh my goodness, did Chris Chibnall steal this idea, and use it for the Timeless Children? Probably. He's stolen a lot of Russell T Davies' ideas for the rest of Series 12, so yeah, won't be surprised. So that's the main plot of the story. Alongside that, you've got the Doctor sending his confession dial to Missy, played by Michelle Gomez, as he is ashamed of initially abandoning Davros. He goes back and saves him at the very end of the story, but initially he's ashamed of abandoning Davros. We see in the prologue minisode prologue, that's just what it's called. There's two prologues to Series 9. The first is just a prologue, and it does act a lot like a deleted scene from this episode, where the Doctor hands Ulia, the head of the Sisterhood of Khan from the Night of the Doctor, the confession dial so that she can pass on to Missy. The other minisode prologue is the Doctor's meditation, which ties in with what he's doing in the 12th, 13th century, I think it was, where he was supposedly to meditate, but later ended up partying and doing a couple stuff he references in the episode. Missy now has the Doctor's confession dial, and she goes to recruit Clara Oswald to help find the Doctor, and then go off on a little side adventure on their own later on in the story when they avoid being they manage to escape being exterminated by the Daleks, and then have to go back and rescue the Doctor once again after he is stuck in the Dalek City, because they find him and then they all get captured, and then the Doctor goes off to meet Davros, so they go off on their own, see the Daleks, then escape, and again try to get back into the city. So that's more or less the storylines that are going on with this story. But how is the story itself? It's not very good. This isn't a very good story. I'm sorry, but The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar are not a good pair of episodes. I mean, they're not terrible. They're not god-awful. I wasn't pissed off with the story like what Asylum of the Daleks did. I think that's still the worst series opener of the revived series out of all 12 so far. But I think this one, I wouldn't say it's a close second, but it is probably second worst. The thing is, the story has some great ideas. It has some great concepts to follow with the 12th Doctor and Davros, how these are two old men who fought in the Time War, one for the Time Lords, one for the Daleks, and they having one last chat before one of them plops their clogs, supposedly, or is about to before they're somehow saved. And in the meantime, the other one almost could have rescued the other from death as a boy, but then ran off and abandoned him. Initially, like I said, at the very end, the Doctor will go back and save Davros. But in the meantime, throughout the most of the story, he's living in the guilt and the shame of just abandoning him because he knows who Davros is going to be, so he just runs off and doesn't save him. I'm not sure if the Doctor wondered if that would change time or anything, or if he just ran off because he couldn't bear to save Davros, and yet Davros was still going to do what he did anyway, regardless. So, yeah, but the Doctor saves Davros in the very end, but in the meantime, he's full of guilt and regret for not doing that and shame. So the story has some really great ideas with the Doctor Davros story dynamic. The Doctor being shamed by the fact that Davros, he left Davros to die, or abandoned him at least, and that they're coming to terms with each other, basically. The problem is, however, despite some great conversations in The Witch is Familiar, the second episode, and some outstanding acting from Peter Capaldi and Julian Bleach, who reprises his role of as Davros from The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. But despite how fantastic the performances from Capaldi and Julian Bleach are, and some fantastic direction and cinematography, we've got Hattie MacDonald from Blink returning to direct this episode. But besides some fantastic acting, directing, and cinematography, it's meaningless, because neither of them mean it. Davros doesn't mean a single word he says. He's trying to trick the Doctor in order for him to give regeneration energy to Davros and then pass it on to the Daleks via Colony Staff's snakes. So Davros likely meant absolutely nothing of what he said, or if he did mean some of it, it was still in the context of trying to trick the Doctor. But not only that, but the Doctor knew what he was doing the whole time and let him do it. Now, normally I would say that's very McCoy, Seventh Doctor Sylvester McCoy-esque, but considering the conversations they were having a few minutes earlier, the Doctor, like Davros, in their conversations they were having earlier, probably did not mean anything they said, because he was tricking Davros just as Davros was trying to trick him. It was a double cross, and whilst they were basically pouring their hearts out, or certainly along those lines, it's possible, no, it's almost certain, that they meant absolutely none of it. So, despite some fantastic on-screen performances, direction, and visuals, the story makes the characters mean none of it. All this great emotional drama means absolutely nothing when neither of the characters mean any of it. Okay, it's one thing if for Davros to trick the Doctor, and the Doctor to fall for it, but for the or the other way round. But it's another thing entirely for both of them to be tricking each other. Again, with the Doctor, I would say this would be very Seventh Doctor-esque, but I don't think the Seventh Doctor would waste Davros' time this much with all these conversation things. I think the Seventh Doctor would get right to the point before revealing his plan. No, 12 is definitely enjoying toying with Davros, or at least toying with Davros' inner sense, and he's deliberately delaying it long enough, and maybe he hopes that maybe some of what he says might pass through, but with the possibility of him not meaning what he says, then why should we expect Davros will take any of it on board, especially as most of, if not all of what he said as well, was probably also pointless. So all of this great character drama comes to absolutely nothing in the end. It completely pointless. What's worse, Davros made a big, crucial mistake with his plan. Because in the story, they established the Daleks having sewers underneath Skaro, where old, dying Daleks are sent to die. And part of Davros' plan is to regenerate the Dalek, give the Daleks regeneration energy, and then the sewer Daleks also get that energy, which was the Doctor's plan all along. He knew what Davros was up to and did let him do it, so that the sewer Daleks would then destroy the other Daleks. They would then come in and kill them, destroy them, etc., and cause Skaro to die, so forth, etc. And that was a mistake on Davros' part. He didn't intend any of that. He literally forgot about the Dalek sewers and didn't know that was going to be a thing. Otherwise, he probably would have thought up a better plan. Oh my god. This was a terrible plan. It's just a terrible plan. Davros, you're better than this. Actually, come to think of it, the Daleks didn't have a very big presence in this story. It's just like, oh, it's a Davros story. We've got to have Daleks in it, and there's a couple of great Dalek moments. And whilst it might be okay to have a couple of Daleks around, we're on Skaro again. We've got lots of old Dalek variants, both from the revival and classic series. Although the one that caught Clara and Missy I know some people were upset about what Dalek they used. I wasn't certain why, but then it clicked. Oh, it's the dead planet Daleks, the ones from the very first Dalek story. The Daleks. Oh, it's not got the slats. They can't leave. They shouldn't be able to leave the city because they run on the static electricity. They should have had one of the ones with slats on, or one of the Dalek Invasion of Earth ones with the saucer dishes. I think someone even redid the scene with one or the other of those Daleks I just mentioned. But yeah, it should not have been a 1963 Dalek that appeared. It should have been a 64 65 Dalek that would have popped up. And they've got a couple of the 65 ones, or at least some of the Evil the Daleks, Emperor Guards Dalek ones in the city. I guess the reason they didn't use a bronze one is so that it'd be a more fan pleasing moment for that for an old Dalek to pop up. But unfortunately, they used the wrong Dalek for the scene, and I suppose it kind of did the opposite of what it was intending to do. And speaking of the Clara and Missy story, actually, this is kind of the better angle of the story. Clara and Missy actually work really well as a pair, both as allies and kind of not trusting each other because they're enemies. In a way, it's kind of that uncertain trust where Missy will pretty much betray Clara any chance she gets. But she's going to have a bit of fun with her first, whilst Clara is only going along with Missy because she doesn't have much of a choice, but she still doesn't trust Missy nevertheless. So these parts of the story, I think, work really well with Clara and Missy's dynamic. Except for when Clara goes inside the Dalek casing, and back to the Daleks for a bit, Stephen Moffat completely misses the point of the Daleks. With the whole fact that it's the Dalek casings that have the suppress the emotions, and they channel it through the casings, and that they translate what the Daleks say into exterminate or other Dalek-y dialogue as opposed to what they might actually say, and they will fire the gun, and exterminate is how they reload, and they the Simons suppress their emotions, Daleks channel the emotions, and they use that to fire through a gun. And all of this new stuff about the Daleks having channeling their emotions and whole stuff with the casing, the tank, basically translating and killing people. It's complete misguidance of the Daleks. The Daleks, the mutants, are the ones that are hateful and driven to kill people, and they use the tanks as a life support system and the way to conquer the universe. And this episode kind of implies that the Witch's Familiar implies that it's the tank that wants to destroy all life on all life that isn't Dalek, whilst the mutant inside might actually be trying to say, we come in peace, but the tank is the one that says, exterminate and fires everything. No, Stephen Moffat. No. Okay, I was pissed with Destiny of the Daleks for making the Daleks another race of robots. But this is even worse, because at least Destiny of the Daleks, it misidentified the Daleks. It misidentified them as robots, which is an easy thing to do. You can misidentify the Daleks as robots rather than cyborgs. This happened before Lego Batman movie had some Paradigm Daleks, Lego Paradigm Daleks. I don't know whether they had rights or not, but they referred to the Daleks as British robots. I'm presuming it was a rights reason not to be able to call the Daleks on screen. Although why they couldn't call them British cyborgs, or British alien cyborgs, or alien cyborgs, or even alien robots. It's beyond me, but still, the Daleks being considered robots outside the show is a misrepresentation. So I guess Destiny of the Daleks kind of took that before they had writing in a bit of an organic bit, how they were originally organic or whatever. But at least that is a misrepresentation of the Daleks. I was pissed off about that, but I can understand that it was a misunderstanding, perhaps. But with The Witch's Familiar, this can't have been a misunderstanding. Stephen Moffat just clearly doesn't get the Daleks. I guess I could say the same about Douglas Adams, but in his defense, that could have been a misunderstanding about the Daleks. But here, Stephen Moffat just doesn't understand the Daleks. And I think that could be safely said for some of the other stories that the Dalek stories that Moffat has written. Not so much the cameos or the larger involvement in stories that aren't to do with them, but they're there as the main villains anyway, like the 2013 specials, but they still have a big role in the stories, but they're not Dalek stories. But in the Dalek stories themselves, apart from Victory of the Daleks, Moffat just doesn't seem to get the Daleks. They were wasted in Asylum of the Daleks, and into the Dalek there was implications of the tank suppressing a memory that Rusty, as the Doctor would call him, stored that away. But this absolutely takes the biscuit. This is just absolutely ridiculous. I honestly don't know what Stephen Moffat was thinking. I'm just grateful that this is the last proper Dalek story of his era, and they just pop up for cameos in the rest of the era. They pop up for cameos in Hellbent, the pilot, where they have a bit of a major role in part of that story, and Twice Upon a Time, Rusty returns for a brief appearance. But thank goodness that the next Dalek story is Resolution, written by Chris Chibnall. Chris Chibnall, as I mentioned in a recent review for Revolution of the Daleks, the most recent episode at the time of this episode, this review being filmed, Chris Chibnall gets the Daleks. So thank fuck for Chris Chibnall writing the Daleks with the next Dalek story. Because any more Moffat-written Dalek-centered stories, and it probably could have gotten even worse. And on top of that, they're not really that greatly used outside of the whole changing to Dalek stuff here. I mean, it's cool to see some of the classic variants and some of the older new series variants. I would have liked them to do more, but it's more of a Dalek showcase than Asylum of the Daleks, and they get a bit more to do than that. Some good moments with them, but ultimately they're wasted, and then the stuff that's introduced with them in the sewers, with what Missy explains, it's just... It's not good. It's in fact, it's bad. It's very bad. This is the worst representation of the Daleks in the official television series. And I gave Destiny of the Daleks a hard time for them changing the Daleks to be another race of robots as opposed to cyborg mutants. Literally, only 4 to 5 years after the Genesis of the Daleks. Literally, and it's in the previous Dalek story. They'd only been away for 4 or 5 years, and they completely missed the point of them. But this time round, this is the third story written by or co-written by Stephen Moffat where he doesn't do a very good job with them or misses the point. Okay, Into the Dalek did do a decent job with the Daleks. I think Phil Ford is mainly to credit for that one. I think he did a good job with writing the Daleks in that one, but Moffat has definitely not done a very good job writing them as the main villains in their own stories. When they take the main villain role in other stories that aren't Dalek stories, like the 2013 specials, The Big Bang, The Pilot, etc., then they're good. Or when they're in cameo roles, then they're good. But in their own stories, Moffat doesn't do a very good job with them. I think Phil Ford managed to save Into the Dalek, and of course Mark Gatiss wrote Victory of the Daleks. But Asylum of the Daleks and The Magician's Apprentice, The Witch's Familiar, no, they're bad. I suppose we have to be grateful that Moffat didn't write the Series 3 Dalek two-parter as he was too busy and he ended up going to Helen Rayner and he would write Blink. So I guess miracles do happen. Because A, he wouldn't write a terrible Dalek story for Series 3, even though that story was the weakest one in the series when Helen Rayner did write it, but it was still a good story. And B, Moffat would eventually write a Series 3 script, Blink. And I think everybody is glad that that story exists. Well, okay, most people are glad that that story exists. As for The Magician's Apprentice, that episode doesn't really screw up the Daleks or the Davros-Doctor relationship so much, but this episode doesn't really do an awful lot anyway. The first 5 minutes or so are fantastic with the Doctor and driving. He almost saves Davros, but then runs off, of course, as we know. And then the next 5 to 6 minutes after the titles is colony staff just going around looking for the Doctor aimlessly. He doesn't know where to begin. He's just going to places left, right, and centre. He goes to the Maldorian, I guess. We go to the Shadow Proclamation. We go to Khan, and then we see Davros tell him to find the Doctor's friends. That's how you'll find the Doctor. So colony staff just probably waits till Clara and Missy do his job for him. Also, the whole stuff with Missy when the planes thing, that was a good idea, but I think maybe that could have been its own story. That could have been the Master's own story. Yeah, it's to get Clara and Unit's attention, but it doesn't really go anywhere besides the scene with Clara and Missy in the town square, which is a bit, which is decently done, but the bit where the couple and the dog go through the square with security closing it off, that was a bit silly. But if they went past the security in the back on another street, then it probably would have been a bit better. Also, it doesn't say where it is, but I think this is somewhere in Spain where we're set. It doesn't really say. And then we get to Missy and the Clara, and then we get Missy and Clara finding the Doctor in 12th, I think, century Earth, England, Essex to be precise. And 23 minutes in, there is one scene in this story that literally drew audiences away. It made them turn off. And that's the scene where the 12th Doctor rides out in the castle on a tank, playing his guitar. Fuck it, we're done. We're done. Okay, we're not really done, but a lot of people were done with the show with that moment. They either left and never came back, or waited for Capaldi and or Moffat to leave. And to be honest, this scene, yeah, there's a lot of there's a reason. I will admit, I kind of smiled at some of Capaldi's jokes and his performance. I did find them a bit funny, but as a critical, objective point of view, and heck, even part of it is also subjective. The only bits I liked was Capaldi and his jokes. Okay, it wasn't the jokes I liked, it was Capaldi. Capaldi telling the jokes, Capaldi being all into the role, Capaldi being a lot of fun. That was it. That's the positives. Peter Capaldi is fantastic. He is outstanding as the 12th Doctor. And when The Witches Familiar first broadcast back in 2015, and Peter Capaldi's Doctor pointed the gun at Davros and shouted to him to get out, and he meant the chair, that was the bit where I fell in love with the 12th Doctor. Because at this point in 2015, I kind of getting a bit annoyed at some of the classic Doctors, specifically Tom Baker in the first episode of Genesis of the Daleks. Not so much the rest of the story, but specifically episode 1. Well, mainly the scene with General Raven in the planning room. I was kind of he's not taking it seriously. He doesn't care. Of course, he does take it seriously, but he's hiding it. But to my younger self, the 4th Doctor in Genesis of the Daleks Part 1, or at least in that scene with General Raven, seemed to not be caring about what was going on. He seemed to be joking around a little bit. Of course, he's serious in most of the other episodes, but that bit, this does still rub me off a little bit like, he doesn't really care. I don't know, it just doesn't feel so right to me. I know this is the 4th Doctor, it's a bit of a joke, he's more of a fun Doctor, but Genesis of the Daleks, he is quite serious. Except in that bit, at least for me, it feels like that. I don't know why, it just felt like that. So in 2015, when I saw Peter Capaldi basically blow up in front of Davros's face with the gun telling him to get out, I pretty much fell in love with the 12th Doctor with that. And Capaldi became one of my favourite actors of the Doctor that instant. And 5 years later, well, 5 and a bit years later, actually, it's January 2021. 5 and a bit years later, Capaldi has blown me away with the rest of his tenure, and even some episodes prior to The Witches Familiar. He has been absolutely fantastic. He's amazing. And this two-parter is a great example of that. In fact, this is a very good example of Capaldi's acting chops in different roles. It's just a shame the story around it was so bad. And returning to the scene back in The Magician's Apprentice with the tank and the guitar, yeah, that is a terrible scene. Capaldi is great, but the scene is terrible. Why, Moffat? Why did you think that was a good idea? At least Capaldi's having fun. As for the rest of the cast, Julian Beach, as I mentioned, does a fantastic job as Davros. Michelle Gomez is completely having a ball as Missy, and I would have loved to have seen some more episodes of this Missy, this basically mad, bonkers, but still quite evil master, incarnation of the Master, some between her Series 8 persona and her Series 10 persona. I would have loved a bit more of this in the television series. Yeah, we got a book and some audios with this version of Missy being like this, basically, between what she was like in Series 8 and what she's like in Series 10. We got the more Series 9-esque Missy in her expanded media stories, but in the television stories, this is it. We're not going to be seeing her again until Extremis midway through Series 10, and with that story, we're starting her redemption arc. And with the differences between this character and the last series, is that Missy was being more mysterious in that series. We didn't really know who she was until the end of episode 11, so we wouldn't really get much of to know about her. And then episode 12, it was more of a. It didn't quite fit the Master. She was definitely a very more unique incarnation, but I don't know. It didn't quite feel that much mastery. John Sims' Master in Sound of Drums, Last of the Time was a bit more mastery than Michelle Gomez's, and he was a bit more of a different take on the Master. But with this story, Gomez's Missy Master definitely feels a lot like the Master in this story, but keeping the elements of Missy introduced. And it's a real shame we don't see her anymore in Series 9 or before the redemption arc in the television series. But there is expanded media, so at least we've got that. And thankfully, she's doing plenty of Big Finish, including the recent Masterful box sets, and she is a ball in that. As for Jenna Coleman, I think she does a great job, and to be honest, I know a lot of people don't like Clara, and especially in this series, and she's probably going to get more annoying as the series goes on, and she's going to take more risks and be more like the Doctor. In this two-part story, I think she's actually okay. Actually, I think she's pretty good. Later stories, we'll see how she goes, but I actually think she's pretty good in this story, mainly because she's teamed up with Missy for most of the story rather than the Doctor. So I think that helps to give us a different angle for the character, or at least have her in a different position going on this adventure. So yeah, I think Clara's good in this episode. Yeah, she's not the greatest character written ever, and she's never going to be that. I thought Clara had a good start in Series 7 Part 2 with Bells of St. John and the Rings of Aquitaine, but then went a bit downhill for the rest of the series until the finale, where she had a good final episode of that series. And then the 2013 specials, they didn't really do anything more exciting with her. She was better than in the rest of Series 7, but didn't do an awful lot with her. And then the Series 8, we started to get stuff with the character that was a bit more interesting. Levels of likeness may differ, but there was at least some sort of personality and at least some sort of character growth and development with the character, even if it wasn't all good. And then Series 9, it's going to go back downhill a bit. Yeah, she's got the arc of trying to be like the Doctor, but besides that, she's being less tolerable and have less of a decent personality and character growth, and less character growth. But for this first story of Series 9, I think they actually do a good job with her. So yeah, the criticisms are going to come with later stories in this series for me. That, or I'm not going to be as much of a Clara disliker as most other fans. Oh, what a surprise! I'm going to have a different opinion to the consensus. Shocking, I know. The Doctor in Davros's chair at the start of episode 2. That magician's which is familiar. By the way, I'm going to get back to those titles, by the way. But I'll finish talking about the chair. The Doctor in Davros's chair. Brilliant moment. Apart from when he tells the Daleks to accept he just got the cup of tea. That was not good. In that moment and the scene with the couple and the dog, basically Stephen Moffat trying to prove how clever he is at writing whilst doing the complete opposite whilst he does. As for the title names, they don't really tie in with the episodes that much, because the Doctor is some sort of a magician, which he claims he's going with. He mentioned this in a previous episode, I think last Christmas. Or Forest of the Night, or was it Roberts or Sherwood? But the 12th Doctor likes to think himself as a magician now, and he certainly tries to act like a magician in the Doctor's Meditation prologue episode. But besides that, it doesn't really work. And the Apprentice means he's kind of implying it's Clara, the magician, the Doctor, and the Apprentice, Clara, or Davros. Neither of those actually work in that context, to be honest. I mean, Clara is the best friend, but I don't really see her as an apprentice. Ace, maybe, or Bill in the next series, but not Clara. In fact, Clara's the one who's the supposedly in control one, so maybe she should be the magician. Maybe the magician's tutor. Makes sense, she's a teacher. And then, which is familiar, again, it's implied to be Clara, this time being Missy's companion for that episode. And that, I suppose, the witch is familiar because she's a witch, like a bit of a witch, Missy. Not a nice one, but I suppose that title was only there because it works with the magicians from Apprentice. But neither titles really tie in with the actual stories that we get in them. Honestly, it would have been a better title just to call it "The Death of Davros?" Parts 1 and 2, because that would at least make sense. Is it the death of Davros? We don't know. We have not seen Davros since this story. We don't know what's happened to Davros. We see the Daleks again. We see them in the pilot having another war with the Mevellans. Though I question why they didn't get out the grey Dalek casings for that instead of using the bronze ones, or unless they're starting up another war. And then we get the resolution as the reconnaissance Dalek, which it kind of ignores previous Dalek stories and does its own thing. And then Revolution of the Daleks kind of ties in that Dalek with the Daleks that were out there at the time. So it kind of goes back to acknowledging the other Daleks in existence, whilst also sorting out the reconnaissance Daleks' clone, regardless of what Daleks appeared in Resolution and Revolution of the Daleks. I'm just grateful Chris Chibnall can write the Daleks. Say what you like about the episodes, but the best stuff, or at least some of the best stuff of those 2 episodes, were the Daleks. And I believe Chris Chibnall is the best Dalek writer since Russell T Davies. I think it's pretty much agreed on that this story isn't that great. I mean, maybe it's not universally despised, but it's not exactly universally beloved either. I think most people agree that this one's not very good. Between the dull first half of episode 1, culminating in that disastrous tank scene, followed by part 2, where the Doctor and Davros have some great moments together, but it ultimately means nothing. And the whole stuff about the Daleks channeling their emotions through the tanks and the whole... Stephen Moffat, you do realise it's the mutants inside the tanks who want to kill everyone, not the tanks themselves! What went wrong with this story? I do not know what went wrong. It's not the worst episode, not the worst 2 episodes ever made. But they are big letdowns. These are letdowns. Capaldi's Doctor has been reduced to a parody of the 11th Doctor, and the Daleks are shit. Or at least the new Dalek stuff we learn about them is shit. The Doctor and Davros' conversations mean diddly squat, and the first half of the story, the first quarter of the story, the first half of the first episode, is a bit dull. And it goes everywhere, and it doesn't really need to do that. The first couple of minutes are great. There's some other great stuff in between, some great performances, great direction, great visuals, as per always. Murray Gold does some amazing music as well. But ultimately, the story continues to let this story down. I don't know what went wrong, but Stephen Moffat just didn't do a very good job with this story. There was good stuff in it, and it looked good, and it was visually presented brilliantly. But in terms of a story, pretty much a disappointment, besides a few good ideas. I was wondering what score to give this. I wasn't certain whether to give it a 4 or a 5. I've decided to settle on a 4 out of 10. The reason I settled on 4 and not 3, like A Sign of the Daleks, is because that story made me angry with what it did. This story, I am angry with what it's done, but I wasn't angry whilst watching the episode. It's more on reflection, talking about it, thinking about it, but when you actually watch it, it's didn't make me angry. I pick up on bits that I can be angry about later when I talk about them or think about them. But when actually watching them, I wasn't angry. I wasn't uncomfortable. I was not happy, but I wasn't angry. A Sign of the Daleks made me angry. But this story does as well. But it didn't make me angry whilst watching, even though it should have, but it didn't. So I suppose that's more of a feelings thing rather than a subjective or objective criticism. But yeah, it would make people angry, but it didn't make me angry whilst watching it. It's more of a reflection or think about it, or even like, hang on, what did they just say? Moment, as opposed to A Sign of the Daleks where I was literally angry in the moment, or at least I think I was anyway. So that's why this story is above that. And there are a few good ideas in this story that do work. Some of them are played out or could work better if in a better script, or if the characters actually meant what they said or did. The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar, it's not very good. So that's this review. What a great start to Series 9. A series that isn't exactly very popular. And I'm not terribly excited for this one, or at least not as much as some of the others. The good news is, however, that one of the best stories of the series is coming up next, Under the Lake and Before the Flood, which are episodes 3 and 4. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time for that review. Goodbye. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the Nicholas Payne YouTube channel.